bring AI to the life. Hi everyone, this is Charlie from COCO AI. Today is our fourth episode of our COCO Talk. And today I have our very nice guest here and also our COCO's early user, the founder and CEO of Weath, Miss CK. Hi CK, how are you?
Hi, Charlie. Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
Nice to have you. Yeah, I'm doing good. This is a very anticipated episode. I'm very looking forward. It is a pretty interesting, serious, but also a very important topic, right, for the business society. It's about compliance. That's how your company is doing. So before we deep dive on today's topic, we'd like to please introduce yourself, your background, what your company is doing, and so on.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. So, my name is CK, and I've been in this sector for the last 29 years or so. Started my career back in 1997 as an auditor with PwC. It used to be known as Pricewaterhouse. And then I moved into banks as compliance and spent about 14 over years in compliance. Last held the regional head of compliance function for Macquarie Group, the Australian bank, and covering at that time about 10 countries across Asia, and then dive into the deep end. I started Synopsys Solutions back in 2014 and never looked back. And then Synopsys was actually acquired by the Vernal Group back in October 2025 last year. And then we decided that it would be good for ourselves as well as for the ecosystem to actually create a new platform, AI native, called Weath, to actually be able to cover the end-to-end spectrum of compliance. We call it all-in-one AI native platform, which I'll describe a bit later on. But that's what I generally do. But just to add, if I run out of work to do, I actually am volunteering with Singapore FinTech Association. So I'm the exco and treasurer of the association for the last couple of years. And at the same time, I also teach compliance, ACRA with ISCA, with CSIS. I used to teach compliance officers how to be compliance officers with the International Compliance Association here in Singapore.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, CK. You're wearing quite a interesting multiple hats, right? You're a compliance expert, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business leader. You're very good at sales. I can know from your sales management, you did build a very interesting CRM system. And obviously, you see probably the last, you mentioned that you've been working in the space for 29 years, right? 3 decades. That's the entire internet era, right? From internet to 1.0, 2.0, maybe we'll call this 3.0 with AI now.
Yeah.
So my first question, I'm curious, right? What makes you feel like we need innovation on compliance? Because when people talk about compliance, right? In my perspective, I'm not a compliance expert at all. It normally gives people this kind of stereotype. It's a bit boring, right? Following the rules, being rigid, right? Don't do the things you people trying to do, right? Don't break boundaries, like the policies, all that, right? And then it normally give people this old school conservative feeling, right? So my first question is that when you say you wanted to have this all-in-all new solution you're building now with AI, right? So you're trying to innovate the space. So what's broken in the traditional compliance? Bring us some more interesting, stories or cases. What makes you feel like the old school compliance it needs to innovation, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question, right? Because I think taking a step back, compliance it doesn't exist, out of nothing, right? Because it exists because regulators needs to do their job and needs to protect certain categories of public, let's say, for example, investors, consumers, and to make sure that there are rules around what's being offered, particularly around the financial services sector, because you're dealing with people's money, you're dealing with trust, you're dealing with a fair bit of high risk, you know, areas, including potential scams, fraud, and what have you. So, rules exist for a reason, and therefore compliance exists for the same reason. And I would say a few things on in that regard, because number one, without business, there's no compliance. That's fundamentally the very important thing, right? Because banks, financial institutions, whether you're traditional or whether you're the newer entrants or participants, be it fintech, be it crypto, be it neobanks or whatever you want to call them, that it's there for a reason. That is to say that they may see a gap in the market, and that there's a potential business opportunity to offer financial services, maybe in a more efficient fashion, and hence these players comes into the picture over the last, I would say, maybe 10, 15 years or so, right? 15 years probably a bit of a stretch, maybe last 10 years. Now, so where compliance was broken in the past is it's actually broken by the people rather than by the rules, because regulators do not come up with rules for the fun of it, because regulators, number one, wants to make sure that the sector or the industry that regulated or they regulate is okay, right? Nobody's getting hurt and it's orderly and all that good stuff. So hence the rules exist, and therefore it's typically what I call it outcome focused, principle based, rather than a lot of people look at rules and saying that's why you think it's boring, because they think that, oh, it's either black or white, right? Because you either ask for, okay, the rule's not clear, therefore they ask for rules to be very prescriptive. But prescriptive rules are not very forward looking, because the more forward looking regulators will want to say what sort of outcome I want for this sector in the next 5 years or 10 years as the market evolve, right? What are the principles that I'm trying to uphold? Right, rather than say I want this to be X, I want the threshold to be $100, I want the threshold to be $1,000, because it goes back to another area. It creates more problem because it becomes very, very fixated, and that means there's no rigor room and there's no ability for risk-based approach. And why it's not boring is because when you throw in this concept of risk-based approach, means that generally speaking, in the space that I'm in, know your customer due diligence, it's always going to be risk-based approach. And what do I mean by that? If you are dealing with high-risk customer or higher risk customer, you generally do more work, right? To prove that you're your customer. Now, if you are dealing with low-risk customer, you generally are allowed to do less. And this is not a Singapore requirement or Hong Kong requirement. It's a global requirement, right? It's a universal global requirement promulgated by Financial Action Task Force. So, I think back to your original question on whether what is broken, people tend to be more fixated with, I just want the regulator to tell me what I can do and what I cannot do. But be careful what you wish for, because if they tell you all that you cannot do, then there's no room to maneuver. And that's not what we want in the business world. We want to have some flexibility, but we don't want to run foul of the rule. And that's where, compliance comes in the picture to advise the business. If you do it this way, what are the safeguards you should think about? And, so that you don't run foul of the rules. So, I hope that's sort of give you that perspective on, what is necessarily broken and what's not necessarily broken. It's actually a lot on how people approach regulations.
Yeah, I think the question of a broken is a bit too radical and black and white as well, right? I don't think it's easy word to describe any traditional or new way of compliance is broken or not. It is how we call this suitability, right? There's no
Yeah,
policy fits for all, just like the country's
correct.
law, policies, and all that. And wearing my tech founder's hat, I'm always looking at when there's a new technology coming out. There's always new things coming, right? The new risk involved as well, like especially now with AI, when everybody's talking about open claw. A lot of technical people was very, having high passion, very hyped around this can change the world, change their life. On the other side, there's a lot of risk involved, like the data vulnerability, get hacked, privacy get leaked, and all the kind of things, right? Which is can get pretty serious, especially for large companies or institutions. And the compliance needs to come to play as almost like a safeguard, right, to really protect
Yep.
from legal framework and also from security framework. Last podcast, we invited a founder of a security AI company called Failsafe. We talked a lot about that. So yeah, I think to kind of follow up what you talked about, I think there's a couple of things I want to unpack and I also deep dive even further, right? So you mentioned about why from different industries, like it's now you have such a deep, long experience. You work for a consulting firm before, you work in synopsis, and now you're with a new branding, which is also very innovative kind of feeling. What technology make the difference or impact in terms of compliance when you talk about the actual actions such as KYC, AML, all these things, right? Like, what makes the difference from different technology era, like from the early internet era to mobile internet, like now with AI? You're using AI, right? Using us and many other solutions. Like, I want to kind of hear you from the kind of long history of 29 or maybe even more
Yep.
years, right? What kind of change fundamentally these days?
Yeah, I think Thanks for that. I think there are a few parts that we can unpack this, right? Number one, if you are like a very big, like one of the tier one banks, for example, or one of the traditional financial institutions or insurance companies, for example, that are, I would say, that have been using certain enterprise grade solutions for a long time, and and you don't have a lot of reason to change, then obviously that brings a lot about another problem, meaning that the flexibility and the speed, you're not able to react, to regulatory change as quickly as you should otherwise want to do. Compliance officers will be bogged down with a certain workflow that has been built maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you're still stuck with it because you don't have an option, right? Because if you want your vendor to make any change to whatever that you've been using for a long time, then you do have to pay a huge amount of change requests, and that obviously, gets people into the pretty unhappy circumstance. So, but what we're seeing a lot recently is that compliance officers are saying, okay, enough is enough, right? I want to have a solution that gives me the flexibility to actually, for example, design a workflow myself, right? I want a system to be able to cater to the speed of new business launches, or business lines creations that my business guys are telling me to deal with, because compliance, it typically gets involved when business wants to say, hey, I want to launch this new product, I want to launch this new line, what compliance thing do I need to think about? So the flexibility of making sure that the workflow is a technology that actually allows a flexible workflow building. That's first and foremost what we do. Now then we bring in the very big topic of AI. Yeah, and by AI I mean there are multiple verticals of AI that exist today and or may have existed for the last 10, 20 over years even. Now the very old AI technology is computer vision, right? Like the likes of OCR, optical character recognition, and there's a lot of use cases. It's not even like a POC, or MVP category. It's like it's been used, right? The likes of digital onboarding, the likes of liveness tools, liveness tests, and ID verification, face compare. Those sorts of computer vision type of artificial intelligence already exist for a number of years, and for what it's worth, I call it like it's being commoditized now. And that's when it's commoditized means that it's quite widely available at a price that doesn't break people's bank. Yeah, and that's a lot of people are using it. But of course, then there's other sorts of problems like, there's deep fakes and all these other things. We'll talk about that later on. But generally, there's one vertical, right? And then there is also, what we call like the expert systems, like systems whereby, like for example, a lot of our knowledge, compliance knowledge is within the brain itself. Human brain experience is not really downloaded into a system that people can actually use, including risk assessments and some of these algorithms that actually can be built. So that obviously is something that we already have in our platform. And then if you sort of move towards the timeline along, and then you get to look at things like the machine learning of the like, and that's again something that is quite real. It's anomaly detection. Machine learning is something that is already being used in a lot of banks and FIs, to try and detect fraud and identify something that is or reduce false positive, for example. Then you move on to the newer age of using Gen AI and agentic AI, that obviously necessitate a bit more, I would say, closer look, because there's a lot of potential area of risk around, is it fit for purpose? Is it transparent? Is it a little black box? Can the agent go around do, something that they shouldn't be doing, especially if it relates to, financial services matters.
100%. We on COCO side, we are applying for the SOC2, talking to multiple compliance platform, right? And to getting our compliance check, at ISO in the future as well.
Exactly.
We're interfacing those kind of questions, and I think this is a very important kind of design principle when we design agent product, right? And I think it leads to this topic, which I'm curious to hear your perspective. And I wanted to share our perspective as well. Like when people talk about leap of faith, right? It's about trust. It's about human to humans trust, right? Eventually, how people make business decision is someone trusts some other people from other department and from other
Yep.
company, they can fix a problem, right? And then we were talking about trust on AI, which is not even a technology question. It's maybe a philosophical, societal question, right? Can AI actually manage my finance, manage my cash flow, manage my customer, manage my a lot of things? There's some people are pretty radical, thinking, okay, just go YOLO. Let AI manage my everything because they're so powerful, right? I don't need to do the work. Like OpenClaw, many other kind of high intrusive, high level authorization kind of way is doing in
Yep.
that way. We kind of design a different model with our cloud based. But I'm curious from your perspective, how technology can build trust, and how trust in the business environment being built from the compliance perspective, right? And how the check and balance, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the most important thing that matters in the business world, right? How to build trust, how to systematically design a trust.
Yeah, I mean, you use a very, very appropriate term, trust, and that's exactly what compliance is all about. I mean, regulation exists. Back to first principle, right? It's actually to make sure that there's trust in the system. That your investors, your consumers, and your various participants within the financial system, it's a belief, that there's checks and balances that is at play, and then the regulation is fair and so on and so forth. So this is fundamentally, whether it's with technology or without technology, the trust is something that it's pretty important. That's why you put money in the bank, that's the first thing. And for what it's worth, post GFC, global financial crisis, and I think this was also mentioned, in one of the speeches of our previous MAS in Singapore, Monetary Authority of Singapore's managing director, boss up there, Mr. Ravi Menon, the previous MD. He actually made a statement post the GFC crisis and said that trust is broken, in the financial sector, and trust at various levels. Regulators with the banks, and the consumers with the banks, or the customers with the bank, and investors with the ecosystem. And that's, once trust is broken, it's very difficult to earn back. And it took how long, for people to kind of start to believe the system again. So in the same way, technology is the same thing. Now I would say one thing, right, or maybe two. Now the first is that a technology, it's an enabler, rather than the outcome itself, because the outcome of what people want to do, whether you're in the financial sector or whether you're investing or whether you are doing putting money into fixed deposits and whatnot, it's still a financial transaction. So technology makes it easier for people to do that, right? So leaving aside financial inclusion and all the good stuff, but it just makes it easier, right? I do not know how many of us certainly don't visit bank branches anymore. Financial transaction is actually performed over the phone. That itself is one form of technology, because the apps and all that obviously made it a lot easier. Now then, when you bring in these other aspects of autonomous or maybe some decisioning that can be performed with technology, then it gets it to a different level, right? Now, worry that I have is where, I use the analogy, right? The cart and the horse. You're familiar with this construct. You got a horse that pulls a carriage, and then you got a coachman that sits in the middle that, make sure that this vehicle, goes the right direction and it goes to the right destination. Now, if you put the cart, which I'm assuming is a technology, in front of the horse, then the whole thing cannot move, right? Then you're sort of like, a technology trying to find a solution to solve, which is probably not a good way to start. So I see that if technology is an enabler and AI being a technology, how is it going to help people like you and I, or even corporates, depending on what sort of service you offer, get to what they want to achieve, out of the financial system? Or what do they want to do with money, or what do they want to do with, cash flow, budgeting, loans, financing, and etc. So I think that's something that people need to, number one, think about, rather than to think about technology as the endpoint. It's always a means to an end. And it's the same thing with compliance, right? Compliance is never an end. It's always a means to an end, because without the end, which is actually what the business wants to achieve, there's not going to be compliance. And, compliance don't even need to exist if there's no business. So I always wonder, where compliance officers Sometimes it's the mindset. If compliance officer, takes a great, extremely, or takes a very conservative view about certain business proposal, then why do you even exist? I mean, this may not hit very well with some compliance officer, but there's a difference between good compliance officer and not so good compliance officer, because ultimately it's all about risk management, right? How do you help the business to manage risk properly? Ultimately, can there be a business that is completely risk free? It's impossible, right? Banks are in the business of managing risk, full stop. So, in the same way as a crypto exchange, as a fintech, or everyone is managing risk, everyone is managing the balance sheet. So in the same way, compliance role is actually to help manage that you're within the bounds of the regulation, and that are not gonna blow up, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, that's a very good, that very well said and very well-rounded intakes. And I think absolutely compliance is the means to the end to build trust, right? To regulate, to make sure business is doing in proper way. AI is the amplifier, is the enabler, right? AI is not the destination itself.
Yeah.
But why are we saying that? We are, of course, in this very mega AI or getting towards a singularity era, which I believe, which is getting close. We're getting so many interesting business potentially going to get a replatformed with AI, right? So how, like, why are you doing compliance technology, right, and using AI? How do you see AI technology, especially now with AI agents, right? Not just large model anymore, not just AI GC anymore. How AI agents can help your business, specifically maybe your company as well, or maybe you as a business leader, right, to do business work. Like, give us some examples, some use cases that you feel like, okay,
Yeah.
before that you feel like it was just a toy, whatever. Now it's like, okay, it's meaningfully changing your business line now. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I can't talk about this without talking about Coco. And I have to say, this is not a marketing pitch for you. And I think Coco came into this space, at the right time, because we are, at least for what we're doing here at Weath. Look, as a business, whether you're a tech company or otherwise, you do have to have your own internal operational process, right? Be it from sales all the way, sorry, before sales, the marketing side of things, to proposition, to sales, and then to once it is close to issuance of sales orders and invoice, as well as the subsequent management of the customers, the client ticketing, and even as a tech company, you do have to manage tickets from the product and the tech tasks and so on and so forth. And without naming any particular solutions out there in the market, and everybody is very familiar with some of the big names on the CRM side of things, and then very familiar with the workflow side of things for a tech company. There are a few of that, and then the as well as the back end, the accounting side of things. So what we have done, with the COCO board, with just one board, myself, I'm directing the whole thing. I was directing over a very short span of time. We actually built the end-to-end, apps, applications, that otherwise we would have to pay tens of thousands of dollars, for the whole stream, and not being able to connect everything up in flow.
I mean, you're not a software engineer, right? Just
Huh?
for the background. Not a software engineer yourself, right? Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
engineer myself, so I said I work for PwC, and I worked as a compliance. So obviously I'm a nerd, but I'm a regulatory nerd rather than a tech nerd. So I think the important part here is this, and I think people kind of miss some of these things. Even if you're like a startup, or you're a small company or SME company, do uh, uh, subject ourselves, to what other people have been using, or what we have used, in our previous lives. For example, some of these tools that's been out there in the market, but if you think about it, the function of a CRM and the function of, the downstream, including, issuance of sales order, they may sound simple, but if you want to try and connect everything up end to end, it's not that straightforward, because they don't talk to each other. And you do have to then deploy people to do it. Now, with Coco itself, what I've done is that I have directed the bot to do all this apps, connected it up, contacts, accounting, CRM, and I've even built a e-signature platform. which means that our client can be
You
sent
don't
an
need
email. This, yeah, well, I won't name who, but there are a few of these people out there. And one of the things that I would sort of push it out there quite boldly is that I think, the old school plain mere automation tools, even though they may be enterprise and worth lots and lots of money, that market is dead. In my opinion, it will be dead. Which means that things can be quite easily built. Of course, if in where what we do, which is very niche. Because there's a lot of regulatory experience and all that. That's a little bit harder for the AI to come into the place to sort of replace the platform itself. But otherwise, if it's a plain simple automation tool that exists today, it's going to be replaced. So there's going to be a lot of disruption in that space. So I'm just going to share. I was just sharing this example here, to show that the possibility of AI, especially with agentic AI, is not what you see today. It's actually what you can imagine, what you want it to be in the future. Because what I have done over the weekend, sort of give you a real example. Over the weekend, what I've done is that I've used COCO Bot to build a few apps, as you know, Charlie. Particularly around the CRM and all the accounting and the ticketing and all that. But then I realized that the apps gets a little bit too heavy. And I want to sort of strip certain things out, like for example, the contact sections, goes in as a contact, the source of truth, all the apps, talks to that contact app because that's the client's source of truth, and then, I want to strip out the accounting rather than it to be part of CRM, right? So over the weekend, I just sort of said, I want to strip it out, but I want it to have exactly the same function as you had built it before, and then but with a few iterations, it's, I believe we were like 85, 90% there. Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
So let me just summarize, right? What do you say? What is it you just shared? You're a compliance nerd, but not a software engineer. You probably never built a software product before, right? So with this AI product, you understand your business workflow, which you are the expert. You are able to articulate what you need to AI. In our case, in this case, is COCO, our product, right? COCO agent delivered almost end to end, very well-rounded, systematic solution connected to all kinds of data, to your clients, to the source of truth, even
Yeah,
to the backend mid office, which
yeah,
you said cost you $1,000 every month. Previously, you have
yeah,
to pay. With Web2 SaaS, now you need that. It's a 10x cheaper, maybe 5x more productivity, right? On that
yeah.
case, yeah,
It does. And one thing I would say, it's almost like if you use the analogy of an X-Men, right? Sorry, not X-Men, but like the Marvel, character.
Marvel Studio, yeah,
Yeah,
character, yeah,
Iron Man, right? AI have made us into like an Iron Man because it
yeah,
enables us to do a
Davros,
lot.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. To do a lot of things, that I would have. And again, credits to all software engineers that this is not about, saying that they are all out of job. It's just that I can deploy the software engineers as well as people with the AI engineering experience, to build the proper product, that is client facing, whereas the internal applications that we've sort of used COCO bots to build that, and that allows us to scale, right? Just deploying resources, to different areas of needs.
yeah, yeah. That's well summary. Very good summary. I think this is also a very good lesson for me to think about the whole ROI, right? How to articulate the return on investment. Basically, using one solution to 15 or 20x your productivity per capita, right? I think that's
Yeah,
kind of the way to see it. And I mentioned briefly, and I want to kind of re-emphasize as well. Your time spent on those workflow and all that, we're using software in the past, the amount of time you save by using AI, that's money because your
yeah,
business executives, right? How much money and time they save, they can get more things done, bring more business to the company. It's money
yeah.
saving
Yeah,
and revenue.
exactly. I think this it's not just my time, right? Because a lot of times we accept what's out there in the market. If everybody's using this particular CRM, it is what it is, and you just use it, and you don't really have too much of a choice. For example, and then if you say I want certain reports and certain things that I want to see, but it's not available, then I just have to accept that it's never going to be there. then what do people do? I'm not going to do it myself. Maybe I get, the finance team or, some operation person to go, okay, go get this report for me. And then they have to go extract the data set and then do an Excel and then, basically convert a digital solutions into something that's offline, and then you try and, massage it. So that amount of time that is spent, right? Not just my time, but the team's time, and try and get to the outcome becomes multiplied. So the cost savings and the time, it's not just because of this then I don't need the human. I don't think that that's going to make sense, because you still need people to actually use the tool. That's one of the things that we need
People
to
who use, there's still people need to use it to do the work, right? But the amount of time you need to navigate and coordinate from different team members to get an answer, to get one thing done. Now you probably can do that by yourself, right? So it's like massively, exponentially reduce some of the communication cost, and it can get things more self-fulfilling, right? And I feel like I want to share my example as well, right? The amount of time I need to, use to communicate with my designer, my content writer, and my marketing person in the past was pretty huge. Like to just get a basic, let's say, event brochure down, because I'm a marketing person, right? I do all kinds of events all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes just one little word you need to change and to get things done. You need to go through that because you can't change that. You don't access to that design file. You probably don't have any of these tools ready. But now, guess what? The tool is so available, and it just in your mobile phone, you can use an agent to change a lot of things. So it's like, and sometimes it's just not available. It's like you need that right now, but your team member is not available right now, right? Due to various reasons and so on. Having something which is 24/7 available, and it's actually pretty powerful now for every members, because human, we have limitation, right? I know my pros and cons. I know certain skills I would never handle, not mentioned to be expert. Now we have like a second brain with a very good, capable, well-rounded, like almost like a co-founder, right, behind you. It's really give you more and more empowerment, and I feel like this is very important to get things done.
No, I agree, it does. And I was caveat, right? I mean, as a compliance, wearing a compliance hat, there's always a caveat somewhere. It's not all blue sky. Save for unless token runs out, then that's a different thing altogether. But the other thing is that what I also realize, in using AI. I mean, not just COCO bot itself, but also with other agentic AI tools out there. I realized that there are, as you use more of these bots, for example, or you interact with that particular agent a lot, there is obviously this element of learning, right? They know your style, they know what you're after, but there is also a tendency of them, just like human, right? And it's amazing. It's a bit. I don't have an answer to that. It seems a bit scary. They can get lazy as well, and they can start to give you the first pass of answers and hope that you don't prod further. Because when you prod further, maybe they didn't do a very complete job sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. That some of these we would require some better harness or better kind of agentic runtime to improve it, because I think it's getting a bit technical, but I think right now AI, it's when you use that, it give you a lot of feeling. One, it's normally a yes man. They don't really confront you, right? Give you a lot of answers, and you say, okay, I like that, and then it's cool and all that. You confront them, and then oh yeah, I agree with you, and so on. So I think that part, especially in certain use cases, it gets a bit tricky, right? You need some human input on that, right? Because you don't want only a yes man. I think in compliance case probably as well, right?
Exactly. Compliance, you can't have it all as a yes man, but as compliance officers myself, you do not want a no man as well, right? Because if every question comes to you and it's a straight away no, then that's not going to work. So there's a difference between a good compliance officer and a not so good compliance officer. And typically, what we will say is that yes, but you got to do this, a few things to make sure you're covered.
I want to kind of zoom to another topic, which is a bit flip the kind of topic around. It's the same word, but in the other way around. So we talked about using AI to do compliance work, right? To do compliance tech, and you're doing that with your company, right? But maybe not exactly in the case of compliance itself, but like in CIM, many other things, right? Which is pretty useful now. And I kind of agree with you. A lot of the simple, low-level automation work can be replaced. It's already being replaced now, right? But if we flip the question, Now AI is a very big industry now. It was just a technology. It was just academic thing. Now it become a big industry with large model, data center, even
Yep.
energy companies involved, right? Like it's a huge operation packs as well, right? A lot of people in Singapore now you become like an AI engineer. Like I was in the AI engineer conference. Everybody was talking about AI engineer, not software engineer anymore, right? It's like different terms and different era. But my question to you is, should we regulate AI? How can AI be compliant, or like how we can control AI in a way? Like it's a different philosophy of AI, right?
Yeah.
There's who wants to use it in a lot of things, right?
Yep.
They want to rush to the AGI, and there's a
Yep.
company wants to say, okay, we need to be secure, we need to be protected, right? And AI can get out of control, especially if in the wrong hands. If in the in bad intent people's hands, it will get a lot of trouble. It will become chaos and so on, right? So I would like to hear your bird's eye view, right, from
Yep.
from compliance expert perspective, but even from like philosophical perspective. How should we regulate AI, and how we see compliance involved in the AI world, AGI
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, look, again, it's you probably put it quite correctly. It's a somewhat philosophical, but I don't think it's that deep or that complex because number one, first and foremost, most regulators or government agencies looking at not just AI, anything, right? Typically, they don't regulate the technology, right? They regulate the outcome or the what you do with the technology, right? In the same way as Singapore, right? And many years ago, do they regulate blockchain? No, they don't regulate blockchain. They regulate what you do with blockchain, right? So that's fundamental principle number one. Now, like I said, technology is a means is not an end, right? You regulate the activities, what you do with the technology, rather than what that technology is supposed to do. Now, the other aspect of this is that I do think, and it's already been done. It's not from me because, like for example, in Singapore, Monetary Authority of Singapore have issued uh, around AI, around what we call the feed principle, right? And that was done in November 2018, if I'm not wrong, right? And that was way before this Gen AI
What's
and
the key
agentic
principle?
AI,
Just
right?
explain
Yeah,
that.
exactly. Well, what is this fit principle? So, again, this goes back to the evolution of regulation, which I mentioned earlier on about principle based, outcome focused, right? Rather than rule based. Now, so if it's principle based, so what is this FEAT principle? FEAT, right? How they look at the use of AI, is firstly, you got to be fair and you got to be ethical. You got to be accountable. Someone's got to be accountable for it. You can't say, "Oh, I'm not responsible for this." It's the algorithm that have messed up, so send the algorithm to jail. It doesn't work like that, right? And then T stands for transparent, right? You can't expect something to be out there, or you're using something that you say completely in a black box, right? You cannot explain it, right? It's not explainable. It's not fair. It result in certain level of biasness, and it end up in something that is unethical. So the feed principle was there since November 2018, right? So 8 years on, right? It's still very relevant if you think about it, right? That's one. And then number two, as the adoption gets like rocket up, over the last couple of years since Gen AI came into being, like the ChatGPT and of the like. Now, then obviously within Singapore, there are a few authorities looking at this, not just MAS. IMDA, have also issued quite a number of AI guidances, and AI Verify and some of these toolkit. And most recently, within what MAS have done, and also I think that was MAS and ABS, Association of Banks, and also worked on this thing called the Project MindForge, right? That basically looks at if banks or FIs were to be using AIs and or maybe use a vendor that uses AI, to stuff, then they need to make sure that the AI risk management, right? What are the things that you need to be mindful of? Now, and then what MAS have done last year was to actually, I mean, it hasn't been concluded. There was a consult paper on AI risk management, right? And it's a guideline. And when you look at the force of law, So in Singapore, or in most countries out there, apart from maybe it's a little bit more advanced, they've issued the EU AI Act and not, right? So typically in every country, you got your primary legislation, which in Singapore we call it the Act, and in Hong Kong you call it the Ordinance, and then that's the primary legislation, right? So then you come down, you got the subsidiary legislation, which typically is a regulation, then comes down to notice, the guidelines, and so forth. Now, why I want to mention this, because you sort of say whether how should it be regulated. Now, the easiest, or I won't say easy, but it's relatively easy for in Singapore to now if you go all the way up to the primary legislation, then yeah, you just issue a law on AI, then you're done. But I think the struggle probably the some of the regulators or even the government consider is how do you regulate this? What what a scope what is the scope of the legislation if you want to do it that way? Because if you get down to a legislation, means that you want to punish somebody, means that there will be, if something goes wrong, it's potentially a criminal offense, or there will be civil penalties and so on and so forth, and someone needs to administer and enforce those legislation. You know what I'm saying? So rather than doing that, because once you do that, there's no turning back, because there's a force of law at that sense. You cannot navigate, and it becomes too restrictive. So what, besides MAS as well as IMDA, they issue guidelines, right? They issue a certain framework, they issue principles to help the industry get to the outcome that they want Singapore to get to. Now, why this is important is because you cannot really regulate the technology because it's so varied. Like I said, the spectrum of AI, you can't just say, oh, I just want to regulate Gen AI. What if 2 years later or 1 year later there's another form of AI that comes out? Then what do you do with the age old, which I mentioned earlier on, right? Optical character recognition, computer vision. Doesn't mean that it's not important. No, you cannot discriminate, right? You cannot distinguish which is which within the big umbrella of artificial intelligence. So I think that's how some regulators who are a little bit more forward-looking will approach this thing. And then I would say the last bit here, right? From a software or from a tech company's perspective, there are three things that typically, in fact, you mentioned SOC 2, and then, the ISO 27001, for example, that is actually the verticals of security. Because when you talk about any technology, there's always this security concern, right? You're always concerned about whether there's security breaches, and hence people like ourselves go ISO 27001. You go get SOC 2. You want to verify or validate that with an external party certification that you're A-OK, right? So that's the first vertical, the security vertical. Now the second vertical is actually data privacy. Right, and why would you want to secure? Why are you trying to secure? You're trying to secure that the data that you process, you're conforming with the GDPR, in Singapore the PDPA, or similar regulations around the world. That's the second pillar. Now, I think the third pillar that a lot of people are missing is actually the AI governance pillar, right? Because if you are using AI, across your solutions, or even if you're a bank or a FI, the AI governance is something that you need to ensure. And this is governance, right? Governance means that you need to make sure that there's check and balances over there. Someone is in the loop. There's somebody who takes responsibility and accountability for the AI. I hope that sort of frames it up.
Excellent. I learned a lot from different. I think a few was very interesting, and especially you mentioned there's no bias, or kind of like there's no one technology is essentially more superior than the other, right? And then
No.
if we regulate the one technology and then we have to re-regulate it or undo it, right? It's hard to do that. And I think in the fintech or also in the crypto world, there's a lot of new policy, especially from the United States, right? There's a new policy coming out like from the Genius Act now. It's this year potentially the Clarity Act, right?
Yep.
Which probably will be pretty impactful policy from the United States.
Yep.
Can change the landscape of crypto, digital assets, and the fintech, right? In the AI world, I think it's the reason I'm asking because I feel that it's a bipartisan topic, right? Different parties from different opinions, left and right, have different ideas, and the AI is getting so relevant in every citizens, every business, right? In
Yep.
work life, business life, it's a level like it's so much stake on the table. and on the plate, right? And that's the reason, probably the business reason, for the financial reason. There's a like conversation about that. And then you mentioned very good point. I want to deep dive even further about governance, right? And also this kind of human in the loop part. In the technical community, which I'm being talking a lot of them from AI engineer. When I was in the United States, I was talking in San Francisco, in Palo Alto, a lot of radical, a bit forward thinking, maybe too forward thinking people thinking about actually bring AI into their life, in terms of like, you have this notebook, right? AI is creating religion, culture, even like AI agent, in the subreddit doing country, right? Like, it's like we in Malaysia we have this like network school, right? Like that's Balaji's kind of interesting invention. From your perspective, right? Maybe rewearing your compliance hat. If AI is getting so powerful, so useful, and so actually in good control, right? Let's not, like, assuming AI is pretty risky, pretty bad, gonna get hacked, right? Assuming everything's good, it's a very well built tech. Compliance, though, in the bring AI agent, like even like citizenship, almost treat them like as human compared to like humanity, right? Like, in the future of society now, AI is so embedded in this in the treat that as now almost like a human right, even like governance, decision making process, and all that. Like, do we get there? Like, do you think that's actually completely wrong, or it's probably meaningful? Like, how do you think about that?
That's a tough question, but it's a very interesting question, to be honest, Charlie. I think maybe in the future, but I don't think it's within my lifetime. And certainly not in this part of the world. You know,
And then we're talking about next 50 years, and probably not. Then you're still young. Come on.
why I say that is because, like you said earlier on, there's a lot of, like, if you talk to some of the people from different culture, different region, the freedom perhaps somewhat greater, and the imagination of what could well be, it is a lot as compared to some of the more traditional societies in this part of the world. Now, for good reasons, because culturally, some of these things can be accepted, some of these things cannot be accepted. Like, but now that you mentioned this, it's nothing to do with compliance. It's just something that I came across. Now, I know that in Japan, there are people who are getting married to digital avatars, even. So they are getting married to agents, what it's worth. So if your question is whether or not can citizenship rights and the right, be given to the bots, yeah, sure, it's there, because they can get married, as they can even have a perspective. I think more and more, even from compliance perspective, right? Certainly, if you are looking at the applications of agents, that definitely it will be even around compliance routine work. Say for example, in a large banks hire, maybe, I don't know, maybe 500 analysts, right, to go review transactions and fraud and so on and so forth on basis, right? Doesn't matter whether you're probably not going to put them all in Singapore, because you can't afford to put them in Singapore. It's so expensive. You probably put them in some of the lower cost jurisdiction. Now here's the thing, right? So if you had like 500 people that looks at different cases of alerts that comes out from transaction monitoring systems, fraud detection systems, and the likes, you mean that you have 500 humans to manage. Now, nothing that, but it's very, in my opinion, is that the person that sits, say for example, you have an office for them, the person that sits at the far right of the first row to be talking to the person that sits at the 10th row, on the far left, for example. Why I say that is because the issues with alerts and reviewing of some of these cases that crops up is that there's information is right, because they may not talk together, which means that as a bank or as an organization, you may not have the each of these 500 people to each other and sharing typologies and sharing what they are seeing today and what they have seen yesterday and the day before and maybe the month ago, and then the new joiners that comes with a fresh. What's the problem? That means that you have lots of potential gaps. Even you put 500 people into this, it means a lot of things, no matter what system you use. Now imagine, okay, you may not have 500 bots that works at the same time. Maybe you have 300 bots, and then you have 20 people that manages the bot, that supervise and orchestrate the bots. Now, and the bots will obviously you can program, I'm assuming you can program the bots to actually work with each other, if you know what I mean. And this is already happening with us using some of the COCO bots as well, to talk to each other. And you can actually be able to share insights with each other, and potentially that can be very powerful, right? And why is it powerful is because they don't say for you run out of token, right? Now and there are insights that they have, like the then you can put it into the MD files and whatnot. So all that thing can be shared across all the agents, and I think the potential what like fraud detection and the compliance outcome can be fantastically good. That's probably the future.
Yeah, percent. I think this is exactly what we're trying to solve, right? Have the specialized role, collective, long-term memory in managing the organization, right? To
Yeah.
ensure critical information is not getting forgotten, and it is a very kind of key components. And yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to deliver for enterprise on COCO's
Yep.
perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks a lot, CK. I think that was a very great conversation, and I think I'm kind of have just one last question before we finish this episode, which is I think a very amazing episode. Thanks for sharing all the knowledge and insights and perspective.
No
If you
problem.
have that, this is just like every single podcast speaker about this, right? And it's just there's no legal responsibility, so you can say as much wild as possible. If you have a silver bullet, you can be as much powerful as possible. You can invent anything great and good in the world. I think as much sci-fi as possible. What do you can build to fundamentally society? Maybe start from your family, start from your company, right? Or maybe even gets bigger for the one. Like what do wish what kind of product or which thing you able to but haven't been built yet and you want to build right now? Like say if you have ultimate power, yeah, or like unlimited resources. Let's say, yeah.
You know what, Spider-Man with power, right? I think Weath compliance, for the last 29 years, right? I do believe that there is a very, very good reason why compliance and continue to grow, and if there is this silver bullet, and I think, I would. I wouldn't say that I get rid of all financial crime, because if there's no financial crime, then there's no business to have. So I think the tool, which we all need, it stems around, generally, all the things that we are doing have always been under two fundamental, I would say, internal control concepts, right? Which is you prevent bad to that may happen. You try and prevent it. Then you put in those now. The next thing that people do is that if you cannot because we can prevent all eventuality, right? So you cannot, and therefore you try and put in detective control to detect some bad things like transaction monitorings and all that. Now I think the next phase is actually to be able to preempt, right? So that you can do less of prevention and detection. And that sort of changed the whole paradigm of how we see internal control and how we see why compliance exists. Because even before you try and prevent it or detect it, you can even preempt that it's going to happen. I think that will be the ultimate tool.
Nice put. It seems like this in the medical world, what people want to say, right? In order to become prevented, instead of just taking all the medicine, pharmaceuticals, right? Which is like to cure it, always has side effects. Yeah, that's
Agreed.
well
Which
said.
is
Yeah.
which is why is that I wake up every morning at 6 a.m. And
Uh-huh.
then I run quite a lot. So I think that is actually, to your point, prevention is better than cure. Now this is even not just preventing, this is actually preempting, right? So you want to make sure that you are able to be responsible for yourself, and basic fitness and health is pretty.
Great. Yeah, that's a very good ending. I mean, Singapore is certainly a great country to jog, to hiking. I think we should probably host some kind of AI on running event, right? This
Yeah,
is
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
oh
Anytime.
wow, yeah, it's a great pleasure to talk with you, CK. And I
Yeah,
think there's
it's
a great
pleasure.
content we and I think it's a very meaningful conversation to have. Talk about AI and compliance in the kind of mid Q2 of 2026, right? We should probably revisit that 6 months later. I think a lot of things we talk about today is I think going to get validated. I'm pretty positive, and we're in the right direction.
Yep.
And so share with the audience how people can find you on your social media and yeah, before we end this.
Yeah, no problem. You can either write me an email, chykit, CHYEKIT dot Weath, WIDTH.com, or you can find me in LinkedIn. Otherwise, I won't leave my here.
Yeah.
or
Okay.
Telegram at chykit is fine as well.
Sounds good. Okay, for everybody who is interested to learn more about compliance tech, feel free to reach out. Okay. So with that note, we are 1 hour in this episode. And thank you very much for everybody listening and to watch our video. And this is Charlie, co-founder of COCO AI. We bring all the experts from different sectors, different space, talk about AI and everything. And very looking for the next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Charlie.
City.
Bye bye.
Bye.